Para salir de dudas vamos a conocer el punto de vista de uno de esos jugadores influyentes. Es todo un honor para nosotros recibir aquí en este escenario a dos grandes personalidades. Michelle Baker, Chairwoman de Mozilla Foundation, y el director de investigación de Mozilla Corporation, Andreas Gal.
Great. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to say hello and say a bit about Mozilla in general and what we're doing in the mobile environment in general, and then Andreas will do most of what we have to say today. So Mozilla is best known, of course, for Firefox, but for us, Firefox has always been a tool to do something bigger, and that something bigger is to bring a really open ecosystem to the computing environment. And so when we built Firefox, we built it both to give individuals an excellent experience on the web, but also to make an ecosystem for developers. It's easy to forget now that before Firefox, the ecosystem was really closed and stagnant. The ecosystem at that time was, of course, controlled by Microsoft. And although there was a great deal happening on the server and infrastructure side, the client side was really quite dead. And at the time, it all appeared normal. Everyone was sure that's the way life was, and that there was nothing that Mozilla could do to change that. And so we found when we actually put Firefox in front of people, we were able to show that the world could be different. It could be better, and there could be more opportunities for an ecosystem to grow. And so that's what we're looking at again in the mobile environment. But we've been successful, clearly on the desktop. Firefox has something like 450 million users now, maybe a bit more. And so what we find is that the thing that we thought was true, if you could give individual people a better experience, and you could give developers the ability to innovate without asking for permission, and to innovate without a highly centralized system, that we could create something that hadn't been seen before. You know, in addition to building Firefox and having Firefox users, the web as an ecosystem over the last 5 or 6 years has been phenomenal. We forget it today because we have new web app ecosystems, but the web is huge. 3 billion add-ons for Firefox, and so downloaded. And so when we think about what can an ecosystem look like, it's easy today to forget what the web has been and what it still is today in the shininess of the new things. And so what we're hoping to do in the mobile environment is to take the flexibility and openness and freedoms of the web and merge them with the mobile environment. Because the new environments are pretty closed, they're very centralized, they're not stagnant for sure, there's a lot going on, but they lack some of the core qualities that we've experienced over the web. And our experience has been over time. If you have 1 or 2 giants that control everything, even if it looks okay at the moment, over time that experience deteriorates for developers. Having 1 or 2 large centralized settings that control everything is rarely good over the long term for either individual users or for a developer ecosystem. In fact, well, you know, that's what we had before the browser. At one time, there were 2 companies, Apple and Microsoft. Apple lost that round. Microsoft won it. It all declined. So now we're in a setting where Apple is back. Apple's winning this round. Google's got high volume, but it's still 2 giant entities. And so our thought is that the web is already a hugely vibrant, viable platform. And if we move those capabilities into the mobile device, then we'll be able to experience something much like we've seen over the last 10 years with the explosion of the web. And this all ties in with the Mozilla mission. We're on the one hand, we're a software organization, very professional, build high-quality products, high-quality tools. But on the other hand, we're a public benefit, nonprofit organization. And that's an odd mixture. I will say in Silicon Valley, sometimes people get tired of hearing about anything that has to do with the mission, and really, really feel that the Valley is all about, finance and sometimes we're a little boring to them. But we don't really care too much about that. We are about the mission and about having this environment where there is openness and freedom, and where the developer and ecosystem is what you make of it, not what I or Apple or Google says it should be. And so this mission of choice and innovation has always applied both to individuals having good products and to developers. And so that's our goal for the next few years, is to make this shift and bring what we know has been great about the web into this new environment. We have really significant assets to bring from the desktop and from a user base and from a brand name and a trust value. And so we'll be, I think it's not exactly clear yet what the connection between a desktop user and a smartphone user is and how that really is easy and useful. So we'll be doing some experiments there too. I think we may be leaders, or you may be leaders in that area, because certainly I don't think that Apple has any particular interest in that area. And so you'll see a bunch of things. You'll see the stuff that Andreas will talk about in real detail about the boot to Gecko and the open web device. And that you'll also find from Mozilla a range of other experiences or experiments on the side about what really is a good user experience when we all have multiple devices. And there's a laptop, and there's a phone, and there's a tablet. But over time, computing will occur in more and more and more devices. The processing power will be highly distributed. And so we'll be living in a world in which processing is occurring all around us. And so the question of how do we actually integrate that where I have some control over it and can actually access it from any device at all. And so what you should see from us is you should see high quality, exciting technology, and you should always see that in the framework of the mission. Choice, innovation, individual and developer empowerment, openness, and a range of freedoms. And so we stick around later and answer some questions, but I think with that setting, remember that everything we do is trying to bring this set of openness. And so if you find yourself unable to do something that makes sense, probably the best answer is to just try and do it and ask for some help about what's stopping you. Because we know that the web is the third platform, Apple, Google, the web. We know what the starting points are. We know what the next set of things to do are. But the real success comes when everyone, and that includes you, has a bunch of ideas and takes us further down the path. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to give it to Andreas.
Thank you, Mitchell. All right, I want to talk a little bit about boot to Gecko and how that entire project came to be and what our thinking behind it that is. But before I do that, I want to take you back 10 years and go back to the very early days of the web. So who here did use IE6 way back around 2002, 2003? Raise your hand. Right? Okay, it's enough of you that those of you who have not ever used that, you should talk to the other ones next to you who have. It was a miserable experience. The web 10 years ago really sucked. And it was an entirely different experience. It was mostly a system around the idea of viewing documents. And there was a little bit of scripting with JavaScript, but it was really a pretty terrible place. And if you compare that with today, it's a very different experience. The web has evolved and morphed into an application environment. And you can have powerful applications and games, and we have seen in the previous slides here how people can make multiplayer games and very advanced interactive content with the web. So within a very short period of time, 10 years, we went from this simple document viewing style to this complex application environment. But even more importantly, this is not a single-player technology. This is not an environment where you have a company like Microsoft making APIs for you, you have to use them. Quite to the contrary. So in contrast to 10 years ago, we have now a number of different players implementing all these different technology stacks and implement the same set of standards. So this is really the key difference here. So who in the audience here uses Firefox every day? All right, who uses Chrome here? Who uses Microsoft products here? That's not so much. All right, it's OK. Even if you use Microsoft IE, that's fine. So as someone who works on Firefox, I really want you to use Firefox. But as someone who works on the Mozilla Foundation, I'm totally OK with you using IE or Chrome. Because the key point is you have a choice. You can make a decision what product you want to use. And in the end, the experience you're getting is pretty similar. If you try all these different browsers, they all have their individual qualities, and Mozilla products tend to be particularly secure and privacy conserving, and Chrome might be particularly shiny, and i.e. there's something really great about that too, I'm sure. The idea really is that you have a choice, because all these things are on the same platform, the same features, and the same standards. So that's really the core of what Mozilla is after. And there's a particular reason why we got to this state in the web today where it's so much better than 10 years ago. And we really think that the core change that happened to technology is that we moved everything from a proprietary stack, like Microsoft Windows, Win32 APIs, to open standards. And what this enabled is that suddenly now a number of companies, such as Google and us and Microsoft and Apple, are able to compete implementing the same standards and the same feature set. And what we are competing over is who can implement it best. And you can often see this on features that you can easily measure in numbers. So over the last 3 or 4 years, the way I came to Mozilla is like, my background is in compiler construction. I build compilers. I make stuff fast. And Mozilla hired me originally almost 4 years ago because there was a performance competition going on. Who has the fastest JavaScript engine? So all these different companies were implementing the same JavaScript standards, but we were competing over who can do it the fastest. So here you see a performance graph over like just a couple of month period. And you can see that there's this graph coming down, and there's a couple other people already faster at that point. So there was a vicious performance fight going on, because the respective marketing departments were using this as a marketing tool. Who can be how fast with JavaScript? Now, it's not really important who won that game and who got, in the end, the fastest JavaScript engine. What's really important to you is we made tremendous progress in the performance of JavaScript. Over the last 3 or 4 years, JavaScript has gotten 30 or 40 times faster. That's completely insane. It's unheard of. And probably in the same period of time, Java got like 1% faster. So there's a tremendous amount of competition around this technology, because we can't really compete all that much on what kind of features we are adding. We are mostly competing over how well these features work that we add based on some open standard. Now, this is great. On desktop, it worked fantastically well. We took the monolithic environment of a Microsoft Windows desktop with like some Microsoft technologies and platforms, and we transformed it into this open environment where people can compete. Great success story. If you compare that with mobile, it's a very different environment. So today we are in really mobile where we were 10 years ago on desktop and worse, because we have this completely monolithic silo. So there's the Android silo, there's the iOS silo, and Microsoft right now is trying to build its own Windows Phone 7 silo. And what they all have in common is that there's a single entity behind these things, and that entity controls all the technology that goes into there. And this is not just merely the actual implementation of the phone, but really the actual technologies. Like what kind of technologies are in an Android phone? It's not decided by you. It's decided by a few people inside Google that you don't even get to talk to. So the entire platform and the entire direction of mobile computing is driven by a few individual companies. And it doesn't really matter like, what actually the licensing terms are. So of these 3 silos here, Windows Phone 7 is the most closed, probably closely on par with iOS. Android calls itself open source. But in reality, the source is most of the time not available, and it's certainly not open in a technology sense, because the technologies that go in there, all the different features, are not based on standards. So really, there's only one company that can implement them, so there's no competition around it. And these systems are also very close with all the things that touch this kind of ecosystem. So all the services, for example, on an Android phone, they're all Google services. There's a lot of companies that would like to offer interesting services there, but they are locked out. The app environment, like the ability to help you discover applications or facilitate payment for these applications is, again, controlled by that silo owner. So this leaves a lot of people outside this ecosystem, amongst others users. If you buy an application on iOS, if you want to take that with you to your Android phone, you can't do that because it's implemented with proprietary Apple technology. But even operators like Telefonica are completely locked out of this environment. Most of these provide bits. They shovel bits between the smartphone and the network back and forth. That's not really the kind of environment where you can innovate and offer great services. And similarly, developers such as yourself, you very much are familiar with the fact that you have to choose a technology platform and greatly invest in using those proprietary cool tools and Cocoa and Java and whatnot, instead of building really just once using an open technology stack. So what can we do about this? Well, we have seen this work. Like, this is somewhat familiar to us since 10 years ago. This is what the desktop looked like, at least from a very high-level view. So we believe that the same ideas that took the desktop 10 years ago from this lockdown environment to an open environment today can work on mobile as well. All we have to do is create open technology. We have to make sure there's common standards people can implement, and then the same companies and others can go and start compete over who can implement those open technologies the best. So we can transform today's lockdown environment into an environment where really a smartphone is just one implementation of the web of many. So really the actual end situation we'd like to end up with is that the web is in the middle, and you have not proprietary technologies and proprietary Google or Apple services, but you have web services, and you have web apps, and you have the web platform, everything based on open technology. And then we can have multiple parties implement those. Mozilla right now is spearheading the implementation of these technologies, because someone has to do the pushing, and I will explain in a moment why it's most likely to us to be doing that right now, not the other players. But the goal is not really to create a Mozilla platform. The Mozilla Boot to Gecko platform is just one implementation of a future mobile web platform that we envision. It's not supposed to be the only one. So we are very interested in other companies like Apple and Google going after the same features, adding the same features to their products and transforming these closed ecosystems into actual open ecosystems. And a little bit later on in my talk, I will show you why we actually think that can be successful. Now, what's really nice about this, once we have broken apart these silos, suddenly a lot of people are enabled to participate and compete in the system. So operators like Telefonica can go and actually offer services once this is an open system, because anyone can offer a web service. So it's no longer about who has better access to these lockdown platforms, but it's about who offers the best services. And if an operator has the best services, they can compete. This can be very nice for app stores, for example. Right now, if you would like to have an application on iOS, you have to go to the iTunes store that Apple operates. Maybe Apple is not the best at operating an app store. Maybe an operator can do better, or maybe a third party like Amazon or Mozilla can operate a store. So this is the kind of environment we enable, because then suddenly everyone can fairly compete over a common set of web standards that allow you to offer an app store or that define what an application is and how you can do transactions and sell them and buy them and so on. A key enabler for this really is that when we started this project last year in the summer, the first observation we made is that on a desktop, most of the things that you deal with, most of the capabilities of a desktop are already very well covered by the web. If you use a desktop computer, you can browse content, you can read text, you can render graphics, you can watch multimedia, you can use the mouse, you can use the keyboard. So all these things are really well covered on a desktop. But if you compare this with a mobile device, 6 months ago, if you took a mobile device, almost nothing that's interesting about this mobile device you could do with the web. You couldn't make phone calls, you couldn't send SMS, you didn't have Bluetooth, you had limited location services, you had very miserable access to the camera. So all the things that really make a mobile device cool and interesting, you could not use through the web. So this was really the first part of the project that we immediately attacked, is basically everything that you can do today with a mobile device with native APIs that you cannot do with the web, we consider a bug. And we filed a bug for it, and we started fixing those things. So the last 6 months, Mozilla has driven a lot of new web standards for all these technology stacks. And there's a particular reason why we are so active in this. Because we don't really have an established native proprietary environment. So if you're Google or Apple, you have your nice native silo where all these technologies exist as a native technology. You have not that interested in the web gaining these capabilities very quickly, because you have your native stack, right? Like Apple doesn't really care whether you can NFC is usable through the web. They have the native NFC, so Coco. And if you write an NFC application, you have to use that native technology, and they gain two things. First of all, your application is locked into their environment. And second, they can use their store to tax you and to take some of the revenue of your application. So the existing holders of these silos are not particularly interested in changing their environment. That's why you see Mozilla right now being so aggressive with its new APIs, because we don't have a silo like that. We're interested in taking the web as it is today and transforming it into something that's as effective on covering the mobile environment as it's on desktop already. So really the goal is to build a system that is very different from what you see today on smartphones. The goal is here to take some hardware and put the web on top of that and offer all the capabilities of the device on top of the web using consistent web services. And the main difference is there's then, at that point, if you use the web for desktop and for mobile and for all sorts of other computing devices, as Mitchell was saying, we can suddenly create a very uniform experience where we can stop thinking about a smartphone as this very different thing. Like on the desktop, I go to a website. On my smartphone, I start an app. We can start blending all these things together, and suddenly all these things connect very nicely. And a smartphone is just a computing device with a smaller screen, and a desktop is a computing device with a larger screen. But in the end, it's the same concepts behind it. Another interesting side effect of us using the web for these devices really is that we can eliminate a lot of the overhead that today you see in smartphones. So in this little slide here, you can see the structure of most modern smartphone operating systems. At the bottom, there's a device layer, a kernel, and then a native set of APIs. This is like Java and Dalvik and Android APIs in case of Android, or it's Cocoa and a bunch of Apple APIs in case of iOS. And on top of that is a native user experience. So the home screen, for example, on Android or iOS is implemented using these native APIs. And only on top of that do you have the actual browser stack. That's where the web content comes in. The system that we are building, this Gecko technology stack that's supposed to implement a mobile web the way we envision it, doesn't have this native stack. So we have squeezed out a native stack, and all that we have is the web that sits straight on a device layer, basically. And on top of that is the actual device experience, the user interface, the dialer. All these things are implemented using HTML5. So we actually have saved a lot of this overhead out of the system. And amongst others, this allows us to build devices that use a lot less resources than today's devices. So this is really nice because it means that at the higher end, we simply get better and better experience, better performance out of the existing same set of hardware. But it also allows us to target even lower and make devices that today would not have enough computational power to run something like Android or iOS. But we can make a very pleasant experience out of a web-based device. Now, a couple of slides ago, I was talking about how these different computing form factors all blend together. And this really all nicely ties together with the concept of a web app. We already have a lot of web content out there. But much of that is still kind of tied back to the original history of the web 10 or 20 years ago, where it was mostly about looking at documents. So Mozilla and a couple other companies are leading the way right now to transform the way we think about web content as a list of documents to really more an app setting, where you're experiencing an application and you have some user interface patterns that guide you. And the concept at the core of that is of an open web app, where you take a website, you add a manifest that adds an icon and explains who made this application and sets any kind of requirements for payments if so necessary. And in addition to this manifest format, the second change that we are proposing is that we should consider and see and understand applications as being something centered on a user. Currently on a smartphone, whether it's Apple or Google's product, if you buy an application, you buy the application for your smartphone, and it's locked more or less to that device. We really don't think that's how the web is supposed to work. In our vision, the web is really something that's centered around you. You have a user agent, your browser, that helps you navigate the web, and any kind of application should be tied to you. So in the apps ecosystem that we are implementing, there's an identity piece where you have a login, you can log into the web, and if you buy an application, that application is tied to your identity. So if you take the same identity and log into your desktop device and your tablet and your phone, the same applications you're buying are following you around because it's the same technology. It's all HTML5. So the same application can run very nicely on all these different environments. So this is where really having standard technology that's very overarching and broad is a huge advantage over these proprietary silos. An iOS application is not going to make a lot of sense on desktop, but an HTML5 application very much does. It's also really nice to actually do discovery. Many people today go onto the marketplace on these smartphone devices to discover applications. I would claim that a marketplace is not really the best way to discover applications. It's simply the only way that makes sense if you have this very limited interaction pattern. If you have a grid of applications as your home screen, how are you going to new applications? You need a marketplace. But once we take this environment and really replace it with the web, we have much more richer discovery options. We can do direct discovery, for example. So if you go to the New York Times and there's a manifest file installed, the browser is going to tell you, hey, there's a web app available for this. Would you like to install that? And if you decide to install that, it will be associated with your identity. So if you have the same identity that you logged into your device, then on the device, the New York Times app is going to appear as well. So there's a lot of very interesting ways how we can discover content and show people new ways to access their content. And that's all enabled because we have this overlap between all these different devices. Now, one last point I would like to make is I would like to explain to you why we think that it's possible for Mozilla to impact the entire web, not just our 20 or 30% share of the web. And I'm going to use this as a very concrete example. So as I already told you, last 6 months, we spent a lot of time making new APIs for the web. And one of them was device vibration, haptic feedback for the device. So you can see here that the tech lead of the project, Chris Jones, August last year, filed a bug in a bug tracking system saying that we need device vibration. You would like to be able to vibrate the device. For games, for example, a tank is driving over a bridge. You would like to vibrate the device to indicate that. So this was in August. Then a couple of months later, in October, maybe 2 months later, someone from the device APIs group of W3C, the standards body most web technologies being standardized in, emailed us and saying, hey, we saw that you're doing this prototype work on a device vibration API. We would like to make a proper standard out of it. So that was 2 months later. And then another month or so later, an engineer from Samsung emailed that list saying, hey, we saw the standards discussion and a prototype implementation by Mozilla. Samsung is really interested in implementing the same thing in WebKit. WebKit is another rendering engine like Gecko. Now, why is Samsung interested in that? Well, it's very simple competitive pressure. Samsung ships a bunch of phones. They use mostly WebKit. We have no device vibration in Gecko-based browsers, so they need device vibration in WebKit-based browsers. So in essence, within a few short months, we went from proposing something and implementing it in our technology stack, using standards, pushing them into other people's technology stacks. So today, most future browsers that you're going to buy in these devices will have device vibration in less than 6 months. So we're not talking about a 10-year cycle here. This is not like telco standards. This is very, very quickly moving stuff, and things become available very, very quickly in these stacks. So this is why we think this is going to work. We think that we can drive this by adding things to our technology stack and influencing the rest of the web, the rest of the 60 or 70% or so, by influencing our own stack. So that's why we think that the web really is the only environment that is really open enough to not be controlled by a single party. Mozilla is not building a Mozilla ecosystem here. These are not Mozilla APIs. They at most start out as a Mozilla API. And we're trying to push them as quickly as we can to standards bodies, and then also as an extension of that into other people's browser stacks. All right, thank you very much. I'm not sure if there any time for questions or.
Yes, we have some minutes for
Excellent.
questions. ¿Alguna pregunta para Andreas? No. Aquí hay una pregunta.
Yes, where's Daniel? Right there in the back. So Daniel from Telefonica has a phone with him. It's a reference device of a very low-end smartphone, a very affordable smartphone, running the Gecko stack, and on top of that, Telefonica's user experience, the open web device. So Daniel can show you a demo of that. Daniel, maybe you can stand up and wave so everyone can see you. Right there in the back. And I was on Telefonica's booth, I think, actually. Any other questions?
So we have the device with us, but we will be in the booth in the coffee break. So if you want to see, we can show it afterwards.
More questions? Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.